The old farmhouse stood remote, huddled against the very edge of the dense woods that surged in waves up the slopes of the Appalachian Mountains. Inside, in a room permeated by the scent of old wood, gun oil, and the faintest aroma of tanned leather, sat Jed. The evening sun strained weakly through a dusty window pane, casting long rectangles of light onto the worn wooden table. Spread before Jed were maps, pocked with notations, thin red lines marking routes, and small crosses designating places best left forgotten. Beside them lay stacks of reports, yellowed with age and typed on an old machine, alongside several faded photographs. One, shot from a great distance, showed a blurry dark shape against the trees. Another revealed a huge smeared track in the mud. Evidence of 10 years of an undeclared war, a war never mentioned in the newspapers or spoken of on the news. Jed ran a calloused finger along the edge of a map. The burden of this knowledge weighed on his shoulders more heavily than his years. The scars, those visible on his hands, the one hidden by the limp beneath his pant leg, and those buried far deeper inside, were constant reminders. He felt his limit drawing inexorably closer. His time for active hunting was ending. He thought about the void these creatures left behind. Not just the chunks torn from the lives of careless hikers or farmers, whose losses were conveniently blamed on bears or packs of feral dogs. There was another void in the understanding of the world, in the certainty that you knew all the predators dwelling in these woods. The crunch of gravel under tires broke his thoughts. The sound was alien here, in his seclusion. Jed rose slowly, his joints protesting with a creak. He went to the window, pulling aside the edge of a faded curtain. The pickup truck that had pulled up wasn't new, but it was well maintained. A man of about 35 got out, sturdily built, dressed in simple work clothes. Ben. He looked around unhurriedly, his gaze lingering on the tree line, then on the house. There was no haste in his movements, but an inner composure was palpable. A tension he tried to conceal. Jed had seen that tension hundreds of times. It bordered on something deeper, almost obsessive. He knew there was a story behind it, some loss the official reports couldn't explain. Maybe a friend lost on a hike, or the inexplicable brutality of a campsite attack, conveniently blamed on a rare case of black bear aggression. Ben had seen something else. It wasn't in his eyes. Jed didn't believe in reading eyes, but in the way he stood firmly on the ground, as if bracing for a blow. Jed didn't hurry to open the door. He watched Ben approach the porch, watched him hesitantly raise a hand to knock. When the knock came, Jed waited a few more seconds before turning the key in the lock. He didn't invite Ben in immediately. Standing in the doorway, he silently studied the visitor. "Why are you here?" Jed's voice was level, devoid of emotion, a little rough from disuse. Ben didn't answer right away. His gaze slid past Jed into the dim room, lingering on the maps spread across the table. I was told you know more about these woods than anyone. More than the rangers say." Jed didn't move. People say a lot of things, mostly nonsense. "What do you want?" He let Ben inside but didn't offer him a seat. Instead, he pointed to a corner where his old Springfield .30 .06 rifle lay disassembled for cleaning on an oil-stained rag. Put it together, and clean it again. Thoroughly. Without hesitation, Ben walked over to the weapon. His hands moved confidently, methodically. He knew what he was doing. Jed watched his every move, how Ben inspected each part, carefully wiped down the metal components, correctly assembled the mechanism. This wasn't a test of firearms handling. It was a test of patience, attention to detail, the ability to perform tedious work without complaint or question. When Ben finished, he carefully placed the assembled rifle on the table. Jed nodded, picked up one of the folders. He opened it and laid it down in front of Ben. Inside were photographs. Blurry, taken at dusk or from a great distance, but unsettling nonetheless. Huge tracks beside a ruler. Hazy silhouettes between trees. The aftermath of attacks, not for the faint of heart. Clippings from local newspapers with headlines about missing hikers and unusually large wolves. "This isn't an adventure," Jed said, his voice low but distinct. "There's no glory here. No rewards, only dirt, cold, long hours of waiting, and the risk of not coming home. You work so there aren't more folders like these. Understand?" He paused, giving Ben time to absorb what he'd seen and heard. "Years ago, I lost a partner out here. Good man, best tracker I ever knew. Wasn't a bear, wasn't wolves, something else." Jed limped slightly as he walked around the table. "I don't do this for revenge. Revenge is a poor guide in the woods. This is a duty. Someone has to do it because the others either don't see or don't want to see." He looked at Ben. In the younger man, he saw not just a desire for truth or vengeance for the past. He saw a potential replacement. He could no longer fully trust himself on long treks or for quick reactions. The knowledge couldn't be allowed to die with him. "All right, he'll take you on. But the terms are strict. In the woods, my orders are final. Not a word to anyone about what we do. Be prepared for tedious work. 90% of it is tracking, analysis, waiting, and be prepared to die at any moment. Agreed?" Ben nodded, firmly, without a shadow of a doubt. "First lesson, then." Jed took a light jacket from a hook on the wall. "Let's go." They left the house and headed deep into the woods along a barely visible trail. Half a mile in, Jed stopped at the base of a large oak. "Sit down." Back against the tree. Ben obeyed. "Now sit quiet. Don't move. And listen." An hour crawled by agonizingly slow. Then another. Ben shifted uncomfortably, his muscles cramping. The forest lived its own life. The rustle of leaves, the tapping of a woodpecker, the cry of some distant bird, the buzz of insects. Jed sat motionless, seeming to merge with the tree. Finally, as the sun began to dip towards the west, he broke the silence. "What did you hear?" Ben started listing the usual forest sounds. "You heard with your ears, but you didn't listen with your brain," Jed interrupted. "You don't just hear sounds, you understand them. Distinguish the normal background noise from what stands out. Pinpoint direction, distance. Understand why the birds suddenly fall silent, why the wind sounds different in the crowns of pines versus oaks. Your main enemy out here isn't fangs and claws. Your main enemy is your own impatience, your own noise. Remember that." The following days, Jed dedicated to teaching Ben the art of reading tracks. They methodically covered the sections of forest bordering the farm. Jed took his time. He stopped at every noticeable print in the earth, damp from the night's rain. Here, the neat cloven tracks of a white-tailed deer. Jed pointed out the depth of the print, explaining how it indicated the animal's weight, and how the distance between tracks revealed its speed. Here, the heavy, wide paw prints of a black bear, 5 toes and claws clearly visible in the soft soil. Nearby, smaller tracks belonging to a pack of coyotes that had passed through at dawn. Jed made Ben sketch the tracks in a notebook, describe their characteristics, and speculate where the animal was headed and why. Then one day he led Ben to a small ravine with a clay bottom, where an almost perfect print lay hidden beneath a thin layer of last year's leaves. Jed carefully cleared it. The track was huge, considerably larger than a bear's. 5 long toes with deep claw marks, a disproportionately long, narrow heel. The asymmetry was subtle, but present. The stride, judging by the next, almost obliterated print 1.5 yards away, was unnaturally wide for an animal of its presumed weight. Jed took a pre-made frame and a bag of plaster from his pack. Silently, methodically, he prepared the mixture and poured it into the track. "This is what we hunt," he said quietly as the plaster began to set. "Memorize it. You won't mistake it for anything else." They moved on, and Jed continued the lesson. He showed how soil type changes the picture. On the sandy bank of a stream, tracks degrade quickly, losing definition. In thick mud, a print holds its shape longer, allowing the finest details to be seen. On the dry forest floor of needles and leaves, a track is barely visible. You have to look for depressions, broken twigs, almost invisible disturbances in the surface pattern. Jed drew Ben's attention to indirect signs. A broken branch 7 feet off the ground, too high for a deer, and a bear would have broken it differently. Deep scratches on the bark of a beech tree, running downwards, far higher than a bear sharpening its claws could reach. An overturned rock weighing 50 pounds or so, revealing fresh, damp earth beneath. Sign that something very strong had passed through. "You have to see not just what's underfoot," Jed said, "but what's around you. The forest is a book. You just have to learn how to read it." To reinforce the skills, Jed set up a sort of training ground for Ben in a remote part of the woods. For several days in a row, he would leave early in the morning and return by noon. He simulated Dogman tracks, using homemade tools and his knowledge of the creature's habits, leaving a trail under various conditions. In mud near a stream, through dry leaves, across a sandy clearing. Ben's task was to find the trail, follow it, pinpoint the direction of travel. Note places where the creature had stopped or changed speed, and deduce its likely route. At first, Ben made many mistakes. He lost the trail in difficult sections, misinterpreted indirect signs, gave in to impatience, and cut corners where he should have moved slowly and carefully. Jed was strict but patient. He didn't provide ready answers but asked guiding questions, forcing Ben to think, analyze, backtrack, and find his own errors. Gradually, Ben began to see not just individual prints, but a whole story unfolding on the ground. The next stage was collecting physical evidence. "Tracks are good," Jed said one evening, laying out several small plastic bags on the table. "But sometimes you manage to find something more." In one bag were tufts of coarse, dark brown fur, almost black. Jed let Ben feel a single hair through the plastic. It was stiff, thick, completely unlike deer, bear, or wolf fur. Found this on a thorny bush, not far from where old Henderson's calf went missing last fall. Must have snagged it pushing through the thicket. In another bag was a dried scat sample he'd found several years ago. Diet analysis can tell you a lot about habits and territory. Ideally, you get a DNA sample. But finding a lab that will run that kind of analysis without asking questions or risking exposure is practically impossible. Jed showed Ben how to collect such samples properly. Use gloves, sterile tools, tweezers, scalpel, package them in airtight bags, label them with the date and location found. Freezing is best for preserving DNA, but that's rarely feasible in the field. One day, a farmer Jed knew from a ranch a few miles north called them. Something had attacked his sheep again during the night. Jed and Ben drove out to the scene. The sight was grim. Several mangled carcasses lay near the broken fence of the pen. Jed conducted a detailed analysis for Ben. He pointed out the nature of the wounds, not the neat bites of a wolf to the neck or throat, but huge, ragged tears, as if the carcass had been savaged with incredible force. The jaw marks were immense. Part of the fence, thick wooden rails, hadn't been jumped over, but snapped clean in the middle. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle. The attack had been swift and brutal. Most of the meat was left untouched. A wolf or a bear kills to eat. These kill differently. Sometimes it seems like it's out of pure malice, Jed commented quietly. He had Ben meticulously examine the perimeter, searching for tracks, fur, any clues. In the evenings, Jed taught Ben map work and navigation. Topographic maps with their contour lines, streams, forest clearings, an old but reliable army compass. A modern GPS navigator with functions for saving waypoints and tracks. Jed explained the importance of precisely marking every find, a track, a tuft of fur, an attack site, possible escape routes. Over time, these points form a picture, he said, tracing a finger across the map. You start to see the borders of its territory, its favored routes, resting places. At the end of the second week of training, Jed gave Ben an assignment. Systematize all the information gathered over those days concerning the adjacent forest tract. Plot all found tracks and signs on the large map. Compile a chronology of events based on the freshness of tracks and indirect signs. Create the first dossier on the as-yet unseen adversary. It was painstaking work, demanding not only precision, but also the ability to analyze disparate data, to see connections where, at first glance, none seemed to exist. Jed understood that tracking skills and a sharp eye alone weren't enough in this war. Modern technology, used intelligently, could provide an invaluable advantage. He took several trail cameras out of a metal footlocker. They were different from those sold in standard hunting stores. The housings were reinforced, coated in camouflage paint and textured to mimic tree bark. The shutters triggered almost silently. The infrared flash operated in a spectrum less visible to animal eyes. Some models were equipped not only with motion detectors but also thermal sensors. Setting them up right is an art form, Jed explained, laying the cameras out on the table. You have to consider likely trails, but don't place them too obviously. Near water sources, but positioned so they won't wash away in the first downpour. On the edges of the suspected territory to catch movement. Always think about the field of view, the background, how the sun will move during the day. And camouflage. It has to be perfect. They spent several days setting up the cameras at strategically important points in the forest, carefully camouflaging them with moss, branches, and bark. Eyes are good, but sometimes ears are more important, Jed said, retrieving the next device. It was a directional microphone with a parabolic reflector and a portable digital recorder. He connected the recorder to a small speaker and played a recording made several months prior. A sound spilled from the speaker that sent a chill down Ben's spine. A long, multitonal howl, completely unlike that of a wolf or coyote. It held notes of anguish, threat, and something primal, inexplicable. Then came a low, guttural growl, vibrating at the edge of hearing. And finally, a series of sharp clicking sounds, like the snapping of bones or the clacking of huge teeth. "Recorded that about 3 miles from here," Jed explained. "I set up several of these recorders at different points in the woods, programmed them to turn on via timer or when a certain noise threshold is exceeded. Then I retrieved the memory cards and analyzed the recordings." He showed Ben how to use the audio editing software on the old laptop, filtering out background noise like wind and rain, isolating and amplifying anomalous sounds, comparing them against known samples. Setting up and maintaining these acoustic posts took time and caution, but allowed them to monitor a large area. For scouting hard-to-reach areas, Jed had another tool, a quadcopter drone. The small but powerful drone was equipped with a quality high-resolution camera and, more importantly, a compact thermal imager. Indispensable for surveying swamps, dense thickets, or rocky areas that are dangerous or time-consuming to reach on foot, Jed said, demonstrating the drone controls to Ben in an open meadow. From above, you can spot trails invisible from the ground, and the thermal imager lets you look for heat signatures at night or in fog. He immediately pointed out the limitations. Flight time was restricted by battery life, about 30 minutes, which meant careful route planning was essential. The drone emitted a buzzing sound that could spook a wary animal hundreds of yards away. Launching and landing required a relatively open space. Besides, using drones in national parks and forests had legal complexities that required caution. The most complex stage was data integration. Jed taught Ben how to synthesize information from all sources. Here on the map is a track found 2 days ago. Here's an image from a trail cam set up half a mile from there taken last night. Blurred movement of a large, dark body. And here's an audio recording from a device another mile beyond that. The characteristic howl captured at dawn. One thing confirms another, Jed explained, connecting dots on the map with lines. The tracks lead toward the camera. The howl comes from the direction the creature presumably moved after passing the camera. We start to build a picture of its movements, its habits, its activity schedule. It was painstaking analytical work, like a detective assembling clues. One day, information came in from a small logging settlement 40 miles to the west. One of the locals had allegedly seen a huge upright dog at the edge of the woods late one evening. Jed decided to check it out. He and Ben drove there in Jed's old pickup. Jed briefed Ben on the way. "Were tourists interested in local wildlife? Maybe amateur photographers? No direct questions about monsters. Listen carefully to what the person says voluntarily. Separate the facts, what they saw, where, when, size, color, sounds, behavior, from their fear and emotions. Our job is to get information, not scare them more or give ourselves away." The conversation in the local diner was brief and not very productive. The man was frightened, his account rambling, the details vague, but he indicated the approximate place and time. It was another small observation, another point on the map. Why can't we just tell the authorities? The police? The rangers? Ben asked on the way back. Because best case, they laugh us out of the room, Jed replied. Worst case, panic ensues. Idiots with guns flood the woods, start blasting at anything that moves, shoot each other and a couple of bears. The press blows it into a media circus. Then the serious men in suits show up, classify everything, sanitize the information, and write off all the incidents as something mundane. Trust me, I've seen it happen. These things have been around long enough for someone high up to know about them, and they prefer that others don't. Our work has to stay in the shadows. It's the only way to do it. By the end of the 3rd week of training, a preliminary profile of the individual operating in their area began to emerge. Its estimated size was very large, based on tracks and broken branches. Its movement patterns covered a territory of roughly 20 square miles, including a stretch along the stream and an old abandoned quarry. Activity occurred primarily during nocturnal and crepuscular hours. The information-gathering phase was nearing its end. Jed led Ben to a heavy metal gun safe that took up nearly a full corner of his workshop. Locks clicked, and the massive door swung open with a groan, revealing the neatly arranged contents within. There was no room here for exotic or frivolous toys. Only proven, reliable tools for serious work. Bolt-action rifles formed the core of the arsenal. Jed took out the first, a classic Remington 700 chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. Range, accuracy, good knockdown power, he explained, handing the heavy rifle to Ben. Enough for most situations if you place your shot right. Beside it stood an even more powerful rifle, a Sako TRG chambered for .338 Lapua Magnum. This is for when you need to work at extreme ranges or guarantee penetration through heavy bone. Recoil's serious, requires practice. For work in thick brush, where shots rarely exceed 50 yards, Jed had a short, handy Marlin 1895 lever-action carbine chambered in the powerful .45, 70 government cartridge. Old cowboy cartridge, Jed patted the wooden stock. Not as long range, but it hits like a freight train. Sometimes that's more important. He explained the choice of calibers to Ben. The creature's hides were exceptionally thick, covering dense muscle and heavy bone structure. You needed a round capable of delivering enough energy deep into vital organs. But the rifle itself is only half the equation, Jed continued, opening a box of ammunition. What you feed it matters. He showed Ben several types of cartridges for the .300 Win Mag. These weren't standard hunting loads with light bullets. Jed favored heavy, controlled expansion bullets weighing 180 or 200 grains, like Nosler partitions or Swift A-frames. They retain their mass on impact, penetrate deep, and create a wide wound channel. Maximum stopping power. He also had several boxes of hand-loaded cartridges with solid or semi-armor piercing bullets. These are for last resorts. If you need to punch through skull or spine, low probability shot, but sometimes it's the only option. Jed stressed the importance of meticulous hand-loading. It allowed for maximum accuracy and reliability, eliminating factory defects that could cost a life. Optics were just as critical. Each rifle was topped with a quality scope. Day scopes, loopholed or night force variable power models, allowing adaptation to different ranges. But since the Dogmen were primarily active at night vision devices played a key role. Jed had a reliable Gen 3 NVD, night vision device, mounted on a quick detach rail, and a separate thermal scope. Each has its pros and cons, Jed explained. NVD gives a clearer, more detailed image, but it needs some ambient light and can be whited out by a bright flash. Thermal sees heat signatures through smoke, fog, even light brush, but the image is less detailed, making precise target ID harder at long range. Ben would have to learn to swap scopes quickly depending on conditions and operate confidently with each. As a backup weapon, Jed carried a large caliber Ruger Super Red Hawk revolver chambered in .454 Cazal on his hip. If the creature gets within arm's reach, a rifle's useless. This thing might give you a last chance. A heavy hunting knife with an 8-inch blade also hung from his belt. A knife is a survival tool. Field, dressing a carcass if you need samples, cutting rope, making tinder for a fire. Against this thing in a fight, it's almost useless. If it comes down to the knife, you've already lost. Gear was selected with equal care. Durable, quiet clothing made from modern membrane fabrics like Gore-Tex or softshell, providing wind and water resistance. Camouflage patterns were chosen specifically for the terrain and season woodland patterns for the Appalachians. For extended ambushes, ghillie suits were used to break up the human silhouette. Special attention was paid to scent control, scent-free soap, neutralizer sprays, storing clothes in airtight bags with pine needles or dry earth. Footwear consisted of sturdy hiking boots with soles designed for good traction and minimal noise. Backpacks were spacious but not bulky, with well-thought-out pocket systems and attachment points. They always contained a survival kit. Powerful tactical flashlights with multiple brightness modes, including a red light setting to preserve night vision. Flare guns for emergency signaling or as a deterrent in critical situations. A comprehensive first aid kit was stocked for severe trauma. Several tourniquets, hemostatic agents and bandages, like Celox or QuickClot, potent painkillers, broad-spectrum antibiotics, suture materials, dressing packs, a supply of high-calorie food, energy bars, freeze-dried meals, water canteens, and a portable water filter, reliable fire-starting tools for any weather. "Remember, Ben," Jed said when they finished inspecting the arsenal, "your weapon and your gear are extensions of yourself. Your life depends directly on their condition. The slightest malfunction, a forgotten item, a carelessly packed bag, any of it can be fatal. That's why you'll clean your weapon after every trip out. You'll check every seam on your pack, every battery in your flashlight, every expiration date in the first aid kit, again and again, until it becomes second nature." Jed made Ben disassemble and reassemble every rifle, every handgun, check the completeness of the first aid kit, and pack the backpack so everything essential was readily accessible. To hunt a predator, you have to understand how it perceives the world. Jed began another evening lesson, spreading his notes and a few rough anatomical sketches, drawn from memory or based on rare finds across the table. He spoke of the Dogman's sensory world, drawing on decades of observation, incident analysis, and the accounts of the few fortunate enough to survive an encounter. Their primary weapon is smell. It's phenomenal. With the wind right, they can catch your scent half a mile away, maybe more. That's why wind direction is the first thing you think about when you head into the woods. He explained in detail how human scent, sweat, breath, deodorant, food, gun oil travels through the forest, how it settles in low areas, how it drifts up slopes. "Their hearing is also incredibly acute," Jed continued. "They can hear a twig snap underfoot 100 yards away. The click of a safety or a cocking hammer sounds like a gunshot to them. They pick up the slightest unnatural sound in the woods." He played the recording of the low guttural growl again. That's the sound they make when they feel threatened or are warning off an intruder. Sight. That's trickier. It's highly adapted to low-light conditions. Their eyes are large, and they likely have a tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer behind the retina, like cats or wolves. That's what causes the eye-shine effect when a flashlight beam hits them in the dark. They see superbly at night and twilight, but during the day, especially in bright sunlight, their vision is probably less acute. Bright light shown directly in their eyes can disorient them, buy you a few precious seconds. Jed warned Ben against the cardinal mistake, underestimating the adversary's intelligence. This isn't just some mindless beast driven by instinct. They're cunning. They can learn from their own mistakes and from others. I've found traps they clearly avoided. There have been instances where they seem to set primitive ambushes, like herding a deer, or even a person, towards a cliff or into impenetrable thickets where the prey had no escape route. They remember places where they encountered danger and tend to avoid them. Don't think you can fool them twice with the same trick. The creature's physical capabilities were terrifying. Immense strength allowed them to snap thick branches, break down barn doors, tear cattle apart. Jed showed a photo of a 6-inch thick pine rail, part of a pen fence where an attack occurred, snapped in half. Their speed over short distances was astounding, especially when attacking from ambush, a sudden burst that left almost no time to react. Yet they also possessed considerable endurance, capable of covering dozens of miles in a night while hunting or patrolling their territory. Thick hides, dense muscle, and massive bone structure made them incredibly resistant to injury. Shotgun pellets or rounds from a small caliber rifle are like mosquito bites to them. Might just piss them off, Jed stated grimly. He turned back to his anatomical sketches, pointing out suspected vulnerable areas. The head is an obvious target if you can hit the brain or an eye socket. But their skulls are thick, sloped. A bullet might ricochet. The spine is another sure stop, but hitting it, especially when the creature's moving, is incredibly difficult. Major arteries in the neck, the groin cause rapid blood loss if hit, but those are even smaller, harder to reach targets. Jed circled the chest cavity and shoulder girdle area on the drawing. This is the largest kill zone, heart, lungs. A hit here with a heavy bullet from a powerful rifle offers the best chance of stopping it. But even with a fatal wound, it can remain dangerous for several seconds, maybe even minutes. Remember, one shot might not be enough. Be ready to shoot again. Dogman behavior, according to Jed's observations, was predominantly solitary. Occasionally they formed temporary pairs during mating season or small groups, most often a female with maturing offspring. A female with young is the most dangerous thing you can encounter, Jed warned. They were extremely territorial, aggressively defending their hunting grounds and lairs, which they usually established in caves, dense thickets, or abandoned structures. Attacks on humans, in Jed's view, were most often provoked. Intrusion into territory, especially near a lair. A threat to offspring. Wounding the animal. Sometimes it might be testing, sizing up a lone or seemingly weak human as potential easy prey. Sometimes they just watch, Jed added. They can follow you through the woods for hours, staying unseen. That's the most unnerving part, knowing it's there close, studying you. He reminded Ben again about the sounds, the long howl for marking territory or communicating with others of its kind. The low growl, a clear threat, the clicking or clacking of teeth, a sign of extreme aggression, heavy noisy breathing or snuffling, often heard just before an attack or when it's tracking close by. Learn to recognize these sounds and understand what they mean. It could save your life. Finally, Jed touched on psychology. Sometimes it seems they experience something like a predatory thrill. There have been cases where they didn't kill the prey immediately, but seemed to play with it, pursuing, cornering. It's not just hunger, it's the predator instinct in all its raw power. He looked at Ben. And you have to learn to recognize the signs that the hunter has become the hunted. A sudden, unnatural silence in the woods when even the birds go quiet. An inexplicable feeling of dread, a chill down your spine. Movement at the edge of your vision that vanishes when you turn. Trust your instincts. Sometimes they sense danger before your eyes and ears do. Practical training moved deeper into the forest. Jed and Ben spent hours practicing silent movement techniques. It was a slow, grueling process that demanded total concentration. Each step had to be fluid, body weight transferred carefully from heel to toe to avoid snapping dry twigs or rustling fallen leaves. Eyes constantly scanned the ground ahead, picking safe spots for footfalls. Each step was followed by a brief pause to listen, to scan the surroundings. They learned to use natural cover tree trunks, dense bushes, folds in the terrain to break up their silhouettes and remain unseen. They tried to move against the wind or at an angle to it, so their scent wouldn't reach a potential target prematurely. Jed made Ben traverse difficult sections, scree slopes, dry thickets, again and again, until his movements became almost instinctive, maximally quiet. One morning they came across a fresh Dogman track near the stream, a clear print in the damp earth only a few hours old. The tracking began. Jed led, Ben following, trying to step exactly in Jed's footprints. Jed showed him how to read the story of its movement. Here, a track deeper on one side. The animal was carrying something heavy or was injured. Here, the distance between strides increased. It had broken into a run. Here, a series of paired prints and flattened grass. It had stopped here, listening or watching for something. Jed taught Ben to think like the predator being pursued. Where would it head next? To water for a drink? To a known resting spot, a cave or a dense windfall? Or towards a trail it typically used to patrol its territory? It was intense work, demanding not only physical stamina but constant analysis and foresight. Hours passed as they moved slowly through the forest, linking faint clues into a single thread of a route. After 2 days of careful pursuit, during which they lost and refound the trail several times, Jed concluded they had pinpointed the creature's likely den area, the old abandoned quarry with several shallow caves and dense thickets surrounding it. They had also identified the probable route the Dogman used to return there after its nocturnal hunts. It was time to set an ambush. Jed carefully selected the position. A small rock outcrop on a hillside, roughly 150 yards from the suspected trail. It offered a good vantage point overlooking the approach to the quarry, while the ambush spot itself was concealed from below by boulders and stunted pines. The availability of escape routes was also crucial. A narrow fissure behind the rock allowed for a discreet withdrawal uphill if necessary. The wind direction was favorable, blowing from the trail towards their position. Preparation took several hours. They carefully cleared all dry leaves and twigs from their spot to avoid making any noise at the critical moment. They set up compact, foldable rifle rests to ensure stability for the shot. They meticulously camouflaged the position with branches and pieces of camo netting. They checked their fields of fire, ensuring nothing obstructed their view. They agreed on a system of signals. Simple hand gestures to indicate direction or warn of danger, whispers over miniature radios with throat mics to avoid breaking the silence. Jed clearly assigned roles. He would take the first shot as the primary shooter with the .338 Lapua. Ben, with the .300 Win Mag, was his eyes and ears, watching the flanks and surroundings, ready to open fire on command or if the creature charged. The long wait began. The sun crawled slowly across the sky, shadows lengthening. The evening chill began to seep through their clothes. Jed and Ben sat motionless, blending with the rocks and vegetation. Time dragged agonizingly. To pass the hours and distract Ben from the mounting tension, Jed recounted stories of past ambushes in a low whisper. About the one where they had to lie in the snow for nearly 2 days before the target appeared. About the one ruined by a sudden shift in wind that carried their scent to the beast. About the importance of patience, breath control, the ability to fight off sleep and boredom. The silence of the surrounding forest seemed deafening. Every snap of a twig, every bird cry made them jump and listen intently. The anticipation of the unknown created an oppressive atmosphere. Time passed, dusk deepened, but the target didn't appear. Jed made a risky decision. He took out a small electronic caller and selected the recording of a distressed fawn's cry. It was a gamble. The sound might attract not only their target but other predators too, or it might alert the Dogman if it was cunning enough. Jed played the recording for a few seconds, then cut it off. The piercing, plaintive cry echoed through the quiet woods and died. Tense silence fell. 10 minutes passed. Jed played the caller again, but for a shorter duration. More waiting. The tension became almost palpable. Ben could feel his heart pounding. Jed continually monitored Ben with his gaze, making sure he maintained focus. With a slight hand movement, he would point out shadows that seemed suspicious or sounds that warranted attention. They worked like a single mechanism, each understanding his role without words. Jed mentally reviewed the plan one more time for when the target appeared. Identification, range estimation, shot placement, observing the reaction, readiness for a follow-up shot or repelling an attack. Mutual cover was key to survival. If he, Jed, was busy reloading or managing recoil, Ben had to be ready to react instantly. The tension peaked when Ben was the first to catch movement. An indistinct dark shape darted between trees at the edge of visibility, where the woods met the quarry. It froze, hugging the ground, then moved again, slowly, cautiously, testing the air. Ben held his breath, his heart hammering so loudly it seemed the whole forest must hear it. He touched Jed's shoulder, indicating the direction with a nod of his chin. A jolt of adrenaline shot through him, sharpening his senses to a razor's edge. Jed smoothly swiveled the rifle, his eye pressed to the night scope's eyepiece. The image was greenish, grainy but clear enough. Yes, it was their target. A large muscular body covered in dark fur. Powerful shoulders, the characteristic elongated snout discernible even in the dim light. The creature moved on all fours but occasionally rose up, balancing on its hind legs to get a better look around. Jed quickly estimated the range, about 160 yards. The wind was light, almost negligible. He selected his aiming point center of the massive chest, slightly above the forelegs. His finger settled on the trigger. He let out a slow breath. The deafening roar of the .338 Lapua shattered the night silence echoing through the woods. The bright muzzle flash was momentarily blinding. Jed felt the heavy recoil slam into his shoulder. He kept his eye to the scope, watching the target's reaction. Through his own scope, Ben saw the creature jolt as if hit by a sledgehammer and emit a short, furious roar. It dropped low to the ground but didn't fall. For a second it stood motionless, then spun sharply towards the source of the shot. A hit, but not fatal. What happened next took only seconds, but for Ben, they stretched into an eternity. The wounded dogman let out a blood-curdling howl, full of pain and rage, and charged straight at their position. It tore down the slope with incredible speed, leaping over rocks and bushes like a dark thunderbolt. The roaring never stopped. Ben felt icy terror seize him, but Jed's command, "Fire," snapped him out of his stupor. He caught the charging beast in the crosshairs of his .300 Win Mag and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked out almost simultaneously with Jed's second shot, who had managed to cycle his bolt. Ben saw the dogman stumble, one of the bullets clearly finding its mark, but its momentum carried it forward. It was already within 50 yards. Jed yelled, "Fall back," to the fisher. They scrambled to their feet, backing towards the rock face, firing as they went. Ben worked his bolt frantically, trying to keep the target in his sights. Another shot from Jed. The beast roared again but kept coming. 30 yards? 20. Ben fired again, and at that moment his rifle jammed, a spent casing stuck in the chamber. Panic seared through him. The dogman was only steps away now. He could see its bared fangs, its eyes burning in the darkness. Jed, tossing aside his rifle, drew the .454 Castle revolver. The revolver boomed, deafeningly loud, then again. The creature seemed to hit an invisible wall. It collapsed to the ground barely 10 feet away, claws digging into the earth in its death throes. Heavy, ragged breaths tore from its chest. Jed didn't rush forward. He kept the revolver ready, breathing heavily. Ben, fumbling with trembling hands to clear the jam in his rifle, stared at the huge, still form. The silence that fell after the chaos of the fight pressed in on their ears. A minute passed, then 2. The creature didn't move. Only when certain it was dead did Jed cautiously approach, weapon still aimed at the creature's head. He nudged its side with his boot. No reaction. Ben followed, feeling nauseous, his legs weak. He had survived. They had survived. Jed shone his flashlight on the downed beast. It was immense, much larger than it had appeared from a distance. Its dark, almost black fur was matted with blood. Several bullet holes were visible on its chest and side. Jed pointed to the powerful jaws, the massive claws on its forelimbs. "Look," he said quietly, indicating an old, healed scar on the creature's shoulder. "It's tangled with humans before. Or someone like us." They quickly checked themselves over. Ben had escaped with a scratch on his arm from a ricocheting rock fragment and a profound scare. Jed was unharmed. The relief was immense, but it mingled with heavy fatigue and the bitter aftertaste of terror. The first thing Jed did after a brief inspection of the downed beast was check Ben's condition. The scratch on his arm was shallow, but it needed attention. Jed got antiseptic wipes and a bandage from the first aid kit. "Even a small wound can turn bad out here," he grumbled, cleaning the abrasion. If the wound had been serious, things would have been different. Jed mentally ran through the protocols. tourniquet, high on the limb for arterial bleeding, pressure dressing with hemostatic powder to stop venous flow, painkillers, antibiotics. Had used these skills more than once on himself and on his fallen partner. It was a harsh science where mistakes cost lives, and pain was an inevitable companion to survival. The next step was sanitizing the site. "We leave no trace," Jed reminded him. "No one should know what happened here or who did it." They methodically collected all the spent casings from the rifles and the revolver, carefully scanning the ground around their position and near the dogman's body. Jed took a small toolkit and several airtight evidence bags from his pack. Carefully, working with gloved hands, he took fur samples from different parts of the creature's body, scraped a small tissue sample from the edge of a bullet wound, and, prying open the powerful jaws with difficulty, broke off one of the fangs. It had a small, possibly old chip. For analysis. "If the opportunity ever arises," he explained, bagging the samples and labeling the bags. They had to leave the body. Moving a carcass weighing several hundred pounds over rough terrain without being noticed was completely impossible. "Nature will take care of it," Jed said, looking at the still form. "Vultures, coyotes, insects. In a couple of weeks, there'll be nothing left here." They covered the body with branches and leaves as best they could to conceal it from casual view from the trail. The trek back to the pickup, left miles away, felt endless. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and aching muscles. Their legs stumbled on the uneven ground. Ben still felt the tremors in his hands. The image of the charging beast was burned into his mind. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made him flinch and instinctively reach for the rifle he had finally cleared. He now understood, not in theory but viscerally, the cost of this hunt. The price wasn't just measured in bullets and time spent, but in shredded nerves, risk, the proximity of death. Back at Jed's house deep in the night, the first thing they did was put on a pot of strong coffee. The silence of the house after what they'd been through felt deafening. When the coffee was ready, Jed started the debrief. He was unsparing but fair. "You reacted slowly, Ben. A couple of seconds' delay could have cost us our lives. Your rifle jammed. That's unacceptable. You need to know your weapon like the back of your hand, be able to clear any malfunction instantly, even in the dark under fire." He didn't spare his own actions either. "I underestimated its resilience. The first hit wasn't enough. Should have aimed better or fired a double tap." They analyzed the Dogman's tactics in detail, its furious charge after being wounded, its rage. They discussed the effectiveness of the rounds used, the .338. Lapua inflicted serious damage but didn't stop it immediately. The .300 Win Mag hits slowed it, but the shots from the .454 Castle revolver at point-blank range were decisive. Ben listened silently, nodding. He felt hollowed out. He couldn't sleep that night. Images of the fight flashed behind his eyelids whenever he closed them. The trembling in his hands wouldn't stop. In the morning, Jed, noticing his state, sat down across from him. "It's normal," he said quietly. "What we went through leaves a mark. Fear, shock, they're natural reactions. The important thing is not to let it eat you alive." He told Ben about his own struggles with the post-traumatic stress that had haunted him for years after his partner's death. About the importance of accepting reality, the need to control emotions but not suppress them entirely. About the routines that help keep you grounded, cleaning weapons, checking gear, physical labor. A lot of good hunters weren't broken by wounds, Jed said, looking Ben straight in the eye. They broke under the weight of what they saw and lived through. Don't let that happen to you. During the day, Ben sat down at the table and began methodically logging all the details of the recent operation. Precise location of ambush and contact, time, weather conditions, creatures' behavior before and after shots fired, hit analysis, weapon and ammunition effectiveness, samples obtained, his own mistakes and Jed's actions. This information was invaluable. They updated the large map on the wall, marking the kill site with a bold red X. The area around the quarry was now considered relatively safe, at least for the time being. That evening, Jed approached the map. He circled a large section of forest with his finger. We took out one. But how many more are out there in the deep woods? A dozen? 2? Maybe more. He looked at Ben. This isn't a war of extermination, Ben. We can't find and kill them all. It's impossible. Our job is control. Threat reduction where they get too close to people. Defending the invisible line between our world and them. It's a never-ending job, and it's only just begun. The last hunt had taken more out of Jed than he wanted to admit, even to himself. His old limp had worsened. The ache in the knee had damaged years ago became almost constant. Recovery from the physical and mental strain took longer than usual. He caught himself moving slower, his reactions not as sharp as they once were. One evening, while reassembling a rifle after cleaning, he dropped a small bolt component onto the floor. That hadn't happened before. Jed slowly picked up the part, looking at his calloused, slightly trembling fingers. Time was taking its toll. He could no longer be the tip of the spear. His role was changing. Now Jed focused on passing on the full extent of his experience to Ben, including the subtler and more dangerous nuances of the craft he'd previously glossed over. He spoke of rare encounters with small dogmen groups, analyzing their pack hunting tactics and proposing countermeasures, choosing positions with limited approach vectors, using diversionary tactics, the need for seamless teamwork in a pair where each shooter covers their assigned zone. He paid special attention to the behavior of females with young, drawing on a couple of past incidents. "Nothing's more dangerous than a mother protecting her pups," he said. "Shell fight to the death, ignoring wounds. If there's even the slightest suspicion you're dealing with a female and pups, leave. Avoid conflict at all costs." He shared survival methods for extreme conditions, how to build a shelter in deep snow, how to procure water from ice or plants, how to navigate without a compass or GPS, how to administer self-aid for serious trauma far from civilization using only improvised means. The field medicine lessons became more advanced, covering treatment for fractures, frostbite, severe infections. The training expanded beyond tactics and survival. Jed began teaching Ben strategy. How to analyze intel from various sources to identify priority targets, not just any dogman, but the specific individual posing a real and immediate threat to people or livestock, whose territory overlapped with hiker or logger routes. How to plan long-term monitoring operations over large areas, using a combination of technological assets and personal observation. How to build and maintain a network of informal informants. Those few trusted farmers, foresters, or game wardens who noticed oddities but preferred not to involve the authorities. Jed explained how to elicit information from them without revealing the true purpose of his research, how to verify the credibility of reports. He also covered methods of tradecraft, how to move undetected, how to avoid accidental witnesses and surveillance cameras on the outskirts of towns, how to maintain a cover story, wildlife researcher, big game hunter, solo hiker. One evening, Jed broached a difficult subject, the ethics of their work. "We aren't murderers, Ben. We don't exterminate a species for sport or trophies." He recounted instances where he'd managed to drive off a dogman, to make it abandon dangerous territory without resorting to lethal force, using fire, loud noises, sometimes signal flares. Killing is the last resort, only when there's a direct, confirmed threat, or when the beast is wounded and poses an even greater danger. He spoke of the need to minimize risk to innocent bystanders who might wander into their operational area. "We have a code, even if it's unwritten," Jed said. "Act only when necessary. Respect the forest and its inhabitants, even the dangerous ones, and leave no trace." Gradually, Jed began transferring his most valuable assets to Ben. Encrypted files on the old laptop containing all his notes from the past decade. Detailed maps marked with encounter sites, track locations, known and suspected lairs across a vast multi-state territory. He shared his contact list, coded names and phone numbers for the handful of people in various regions he could trust. He explained the encryption system and the codes he used for communication. He was, in effect, preparing Ben to operate autonomously to carry on his work. As a test, Jed sent Ben on a solo assignment. Word had come in about strange tracks found by a hunter in a national forest in the neighboring state, about 200 miles away. Ben's task was to get there, locate the site, confirm or refute the report, set up a couple of trail cams for long-term monitoring, and, if possible, cautiously speak with the hunter without raising suspicion. Jed remained at the farmhouse, maintaining contact via the encrypted satellite phone channel. Ben succeeded. He found the tracks, confirmed they belonged to a dogman, deployed the cameras, and gathered additional information from the local. He operated cautiously, professionally, and independently. When Ben returned, Jed greeted him with a silent nod. He saw before him not the same novice who had arrived months ago with desperation and determination in his eyes. Ben had been through the crucible of combat, through grueling training, through the test of autonomy. He had matured, been tempered. His gaze held a new firmness, a depth of understanding. He grasped the full weight and danger of the mission, but was ready to bear the burden. He had silently accepted the old hunter's legacy. Jed knew his knowledge would not be lost. The quiet didn't last long. One evening, a message came through the secure comms channel from one of Jed's old contacts, a retired ranger who still kept tabs on happenings in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. The information was fragmented but disturbing. In a remote area of Washington state, known for its dense rainforests and rugged mountains, a series of strange events had occurred. Several hikers had vanished without a trace on popular trails. Local authorities spoke of accidents, bad weather, possible cougar or grizzly bear attacks. But then came reports of unusually savage attacks on livestock at farms bordering the national forest. The nature of the wounds, the massive tracks left in the mud, everything pointed to a familiar signature. The alarm had been sounded. A new threat demanded attention. Jed carefully studied the forwarded materials, maps of the area, clippings from local online news outlets, brief incident summaries. He knew he could no longer undertake such a distant and potentially dangerous expedition himself. His body protested against long treks over difficult terrain, and his reactions were no longer sharp enough to rely on in a critical situation. His role was different now. He was the strategist, the analyst, the coordinator, the advisor. Ben would have to be the field operative for this mission. The shift in roles happened naturally, without needing to be spoken. Ben accepted the responsibility as a matter of course. He began preparing for the journey west. Methodically, step by step, he checked and prepped his gear, drawing on all the knowledge Jed had imparted. He selected his weapons, the .300 Winchester Magnum rifle as his primary tool, and the .45 .70 government carbine for potential work in the dense rainforest undergrowth. He carefully selected ammunition, checked his optics, including the NVD and thermal scopes. He packed his backpack, paying special attention to clothing and gear suited for the damp, cool climate of the Northwest. He spent hours studying topographic maps of the new region, plotting potential routes, marking points of interest based on the incoming intel. In the evenings, he and Jed discussed the plan of action over the secure comms. Jed shared his thoughts on likely creature habitats, tracking tactics in dense undergrowth and frequent rain, and offered advice on interacting with locals and avoiding official attention. Jed sat in his old armchair, gazing at the large map of the United States tacked to the wall, covered in his markings from over the years. Red pins marked confirmed Dogmen activity sites. Yellow pins denoted unverified reports and rumors. The map spanned vast territories, from the Appalachians to the Rockies, from the Great Lakes to the forests of the Southeast. He was acutely aware that their fight was merely an attempt to maintain a fragile balance, to shield an unsuspecting world from the threat lurking in the country's wildest corners. Completely eradicating the threat was impossible. It was a perpetual war on an unseen front, demanding constant vigilance, knowledge, self-sacrifice, and a readiness for the worst. The day of departure arrived. Ben stood on the threshold of Jed's house, ready for the long drive west. His weathered pickup truck was loaded with gear. His eyes no longer held youthful uncertainty or blind obsession. There was a quiet understanding of the danger, the gravity of the mission ahead, and his own responsibility. He checked his rifle one last time, carefully sliding it into its case. He slung the heavy pack over his shoulder. He was ready. "Be careful out there, Ben," Jed said, his eyes following him. The old hunter's voice was steady but tinged with concern and a valedictory weight. Ben nodded. "I will be." He got into the pickup, started the engine. The truck rolled slowly down the gravel drive, carrying him towards a new hunt, new dangers, new lessons,